Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our worship service. Okay, my name is Mark Tusoy. I'm one of the pastors of Victory Fort, and we exist for two things: to honor God and make disciples. Now, Pastor Reb is not here; he's officiating a wedding. And as he mentioned last week, we are in a mini series entitled "Bring Me Back." Okay, bring us back where? Bring us back to a place of hope and faith. You know, I have 3 kids, and I'm not sure if you experience this or ginawa mo to as a parent, no? Yung ilalagay mo yung anak mo dun sa lamesa, sa table, and then you will ask your child to jump. Experience nyo ba yun? Type nyo dyan sa chat box, ako yun. But whether you're a parent, the one asking your child to jump, or you are the child, your parents asking you to jump, no? So, nang first time kong ginawa yun sa anak ko, no, lagay ko sa lamesa, yung alam mo yung may fear, baka mahulog sila, no? So when I asked them, Maxine, jump. Yung may excitement na kasamang kaba, natatakot. So ang gagawin niya, tatry niyang hawakan yung kamay ko. Pag nare-reach niya yung kamay ko, parang at least sure siya, no, na masasalo ko siya. And then she will jump. Then after a while, marirealize niya, my daddy will catch me. So kahit palayo ako ng palayo, because alam niya na sasaluhin ko siya, no, she will jump kahit gaano pa kalayo. And there was one time, nasa stairs, ako paakyat pa lang sa stairs. Then all of a sudden, she jumped. Buti na lang may pagka-ninja ako, no? So nasalo ko siya. Sumutik na kami dalawa mahulog sa hagdanan. For her, alam na alam niya, no, that she can trust me, and that is why she's willing to jump. Kahit hindi pa ako ready, ako yung kinabahan. No? And I hope our faith is like that also. That we can take that leap of faith knowing that our Father will catch us. Now today we'll look at a very familiar verse or a story in the Bible. Okay, this was the time when the Israelites were going to the promised land. So we'll be in Numbers 13. So ito yung time na they sent out 12 spies to check the land. Now we will see there are a lot of lessons we can learn from that story. And I want to to draw 3 lessons from that. So we'll be talking about God's faithfulness, man's unbelief and rebellion, and God's judgment and grace. So those are the 3 lessons we'll be discussing. So first, let's talk about God's faithfulness. Now in Genesis 11, verse 31, Terah took his son, Abram, his grandson Lot of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram, and together they set out from Ur the Chaldeans to go to Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. Now here we can already see that the promised land, going to Canaan, goes back before Abram. Nandun pa sa tatay ni Abram, si Terah. So Terah uprooted his family from their home in Ur of the Chaldeans and set out for the land of Canaan. And for unknown reasons, Terah never made it to their destination, to Canaan, and they settled in Haran. Now let's check Genesis 12, verse 4. So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. So his father wasn't able to go to the Canaan, so this time it's Abram's turn. Verse 5 of Genesis 12, he took his wife, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Now let's go to verse 7. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. So here we can already see that Canaan, okay, has been already promised to Abraham that his descendants will live there and they will settle there. So even before Moses, diba? Before going pa and spying the land, Canaan has already been promised to them. Now let's go to Genesis 50. Okay, let me read from the New Living Translation. Okay, verse 24. Okay, this is Joseph. "Soon I will die. Joseph told his brothers," listen to this, "but God will surely come to help you and lead you out of this land of Egypt." So somehow Joseph already knew, okay, that God will help them get out of Egypt. So Egypt was just a temporary place for them. He will bring you back to the land he solemnly promised to give. Okay, bring you back. He promised to give to Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob. So there we can see God's faithfulness. So what can we learn about God's character? That God is faithful. That He is not just a promise giver, but He is also a promise keeper. That He is a God who thinks generationally and works generationally. And His purposes will prevail with or without us. So from the time of Abram's father Terah to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then Joseph mentioned it. Now, okay, fast forward to Numbers. Okay, this is the time na, ito na yung after experiencing the 10 plagues in Egypt, now going out of Egypt, diba? Going to the desert, now malapit na sila sa promised land. So now, they will go there and scout the land. So let's read Numbers 13. "The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, 'Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, everyone a chief among them.'" So these men were on a reconnaissance mission. They want to observe the land of Canaan and bring back a good report to the nation. Now the question is it really worthwhile and needed to go to this mission trip? Kailangan ba talaga nilang i-check yung lugar? Because God already said that He will give it to them, and it is a land flowing with milk and honey. So, meron pa ba mga information na kailangan nilang malaman about that place? Why do they need to check the land? And you'll be amazed that sending the spies there to check the land was not actually God's plan. It didn't originate from God nor from Moses. It was the people's idea. Now let's look at Deuteronomy 1, verse 21. "See, the Lord your God has set the land before you. Go up, take possession, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has told you. Do not fear or be dismayed." See, the command was for them to go up and take possession, for them not to fear or be dismayed. So, yun yung instruction ni God. So, going to the promised land to spy out there was not God's plan. Now, verse 22. Then all of you came near me and said, "Let us send men before us, that they may explore the land for us, and bring us word again of the way by which we must go up, and the cities into which we shall come." See, it's very clear that the plan to send spies did not directly originate with Moses, but from the people. And in verse 23, the thing seemed good to me. So, for Moses, he was pleased with that idea. And I took 12 men from you, 1 man from each tribe. Now let's go back to Numbers 13. Verse 17, Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said to them, go up into the Negev and go up into the hill country. So ito na yung commissioning of the spies. Kung merong spice girls, meron ding spice boys. So they sent out 12 spies to check the land. Now in verse 17 to 20, and see what the land is and whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, whether they are few or many, and whether the land that they dwell in is good or bad, and whether the cities that they dwell in are camps or strongholds. So Moses' reaction to the spies was a subtle manifestation already of unbelief. Kailangan ba talaga nilang malaman kung okay yung lugar? Did he doubt that the land was rich? Did he doubt that there were useful forests? And did it really matter if the people were strong or many? Or if they lived in strongholds? Importante pa ba yun? Because God already said to go there and to take possession. Now, at Moses' calling at the burning bush, God told him the land of Canaan was already good and large. Now, let's check Exodus 3, verse 8. And I have commanded, and I have come down to deliver them out of the land. And I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of the land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. See, God already said kung ano yung itsura ng land. See, faith takes God at His word. And I hope when God says something to us, when God promises something to us, we don't need to question Him. We just have to step out in faith. Because faith takes God's at His word. You see, God is faithful. Okay, He was faithful yesterday, He is still faithful today, and He will continue to be faithful tomorrow. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. My question is, have you experienced God's faithfulness? Do you have any personal story of God's goodness? Of how He provided for you? Of how He healed you or your loved one? Or of how He rescued you from a difficult situation? Do you have your own story of God's faithfulness? Now, Numbers 13, 21 to 25, okay, let me just summarize those verses. Okay, yun yung time na the 12 spies already went to the promised land to spy the land. Okay, ano ba yung promised land? Why is it important to us? Why is it significant? See, the promised land to the Israelites, okay, it is a land given by God as their inheritance. But for us Christians, in a general perspective, okay, it's God's eternal promised land. Okay, as our heritage. Okay, for those who surrendered their life to Christ, for those who believe in the finished work of Jesus Christ on the cross. Okay, that is our future, our eternal place with Jesus Christ. Now, on a personal note, okay, the promised land can also be any type of satisfying achievement or a state of realized dreams. Diba? Kunyari, na-promote ka. Diba? Because of that promotion, umasenso yung buhay mo. That could be a promised land, okay, in a more personal sense. So now they're going to the promised land, the land God giving to them as their inheritance. Okay, let's go to Numbers 13, verse 25. At the end of 40 days, they returned from spying out the land. So they spied for 40 days. Verse 20, and they came to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Verse 27, and they told him, we came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey. And this is its fruit. So sabi ni Moses, no, check niyo, and then you bring some fruit also. So I guess para lang to encourage them, may proof, ito yung itsura ng prutas doon. So far, so good. So what God has promised about the land was indeed true. But how did the people respond to God's faithfulness? Now let's talk about man's unbelief and rebellion. How these Israelites responded. In Numbers 13, verse 28, however, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. So yung opening niya, no, however, or but, nevertheless. No, however means in spite of all of that, diba? In Tagalog, kaya lang. Maganda sana yung lugar, kaya lang. Now, verse 29, the Amalekites dwell in the land of the Negev, and the Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the hill country, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan. Okay, there were 7 nations in the land of Canaan. So, in spite of God's faithfulness, no, sabi na, the people who dwell in the land are strong. Nakalimutan nila yung mga ginawa ni God, no? After all the things God has done, nakalimutan nila, kasi mayroon mga tao dun eh. But in spite of God's faithfulness, the cities are fortified and very large. In spite of God's faithfulness, we saw the descendants of Anak there. Imagine mo, anak pa lang, natakot na sila. What if nakita pa nila yung magulang? No, but seriously, Anak, in olden times, regarded as the greatest man among the Anakim. Okay, Anak's descendants are called Anakim or Anakites. They are formidable race of giants. Warlike. Hindi ito yung mga parang mga matatangkad lang na parang lampa, no? They are warlike people. Very strong and very, good in fighting. And then sabi nila dito, no, the Amalekites, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, no, in spite of God's faithfulness, may mga kontrabida dito, ang daming mga kalaban. So all the land is taken up. Okay, there are no vacancies. When they face that obstacle, that hindrance, all of a sudden, all of God's faithfulness in them, all the history they have with God, biglang naglaho, no? Nakalimutan na nila. Mas nauna yung takot sa kanila. And maybe some of us can relate to that. Everything is doing good. God has given us a promise. And then when a problem or when a giant is in front of us, when there's an obstacle in front of us, when there's a hindrance in front of us, bigla na lang nauunay na yung takot. So in Numbers 13, verse 30, but Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. Now, while those 10 spies were sharing all the negative things that they saw, immediately, Caleb stopped them. And he encouraged them to trust and obey God, to take the land. Sabi nila, kaya natin to. Pareho lang sila nang nakita, but the 10 spies look at their situation, look at those obstacles through eyes of fear, through man's perspective. But Joshua and Caleb saw the situation through eyes of faith, in God's perspective. And it took a lot of courage for Caleb to stand up against the tide of unbelief, of doubt. Diba? Yung mga, in spite of all of that attitude. And verse 31, then the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. Hindi natin kaya, nakakatak. masyado silang malakas for us. Then verse 32. So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, the land through which we had gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it are of great height. Now, their unbelieving response was a potent combination of truth, lies, and exaggeration. Now, verse 33. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. Now, let me show you. Okay, it's again, like I mentioned, it's a combination of truth and lies and exaggeration. Sabi nila, they are stronger than we are. Yes, that is true, that they are stronger than the Israelites. But it is a lie to say that we are not able to go against the people. Yes, it is true that they had gone throughout the land. Na-check nila yung buong land, yung buong Canaan. That's true. But it is a lie to say that the land devours its inhabitants. And it's also an exaggeration to say that all the peoples that we saw in it are of great height. We seem like grasshoppers. Hindi naman ang tao doon, giants. Kaya may mga race lang, yung mga lahi lang doon na matatangkad, no? No, when you say giant, hindi ito yung parang Attack of the Titans, no, na kasing taas ng building or ng wall. You know, a giant is around 8 feet to 12 feet tall. That's what yun yung giant. So their unbelieving response, okay, was a combination of truth, lies, and exaggeration. Now, like what David Gusick said, unbelief often presents itself as being factual or practical or down to earth. Yet the most factual, practical, and down to earth thing we can do is trust the word of the living God. So ultimately, faith or unbelief does not spring from circumstances or environment, but from our hearts, which God must change. Now in Isaiah 40, verse 22, now they say that they seem like grasshoppers to in their eyes, and in their eyes, no, mukha silang grasshoppers. But let's look at Isaiah 40, verse 22. It says, their God sits above the circle of the earth. The people below seem like grasshoppers to him. He spreads out the heavens like a curtain and makes his tent from them. Now, can you imagine? Sabi nila, mukha kaming grasshoppers. But in God's perspective, yung tao yung grasshoppers. Now, it's really more of, sino ba yung mas paniniwalaan mo? Sino ba yung mukhang mas malaki? Si God ba? O yung giant na kaharap mo? Are those giants stronger, bigger than God? It says there in verse 22 of Isaiah 40, look up in the heavens, who created all the stars. He brings them out like an army, one after another, calling each by its name, because of his great power in incomparable strength. Not a single one is missing. I hope no matter how big the giants in front of us, they are grasshoppers in God's eyes. Now let's go back to Numbers 14. Okay, verse 1. Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. So when they heard those bad report from the 10 spies, they wept. So the unbelief of the 10 spies truly represented the unbelieving heart of the nation. So hindi lang yung 10 spies, no, but as a nation, that's how they felt. And they wept and cried. They mourned because God would not make it all easy. And we often sometimes expect that God will make easy for us. And we resent adversity in our lives. Pagka parang feeling natin, no, pahirapan tayo ni Lord, umaayaw na kagad tayo. Okay, it was mourning filled with resentful attitude towards God, blaming him for their problem, denying that he is a loving father who cares for his children. Is that how we feel sometimes with God? We resent Him. We feel that God doesn't love us, that He doesn't care for us. It was mourning that gave into the feeling of unbelief and fear. Kumbaga, their mourning is plain rebellion and sin against God. Verse 2, and all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? So here you can see them accusing and blaming God. Verse 4, and they said to one another, let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt. They were not just rejecting Moses and Aaron as their leader, but they were rejecting God as their leader. Verse 6, and Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes. So when they heard the response of the people, they tore their clothes out of misery. Verse 7, and said to all the congregation of the people of Israel, the land which we passed through to spy it out is an exceedingly good land. Verse 8, if the Lord delights in us, He will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. So they know that God delights in them and that God will give it to them. Verse 9, only do not rebel against the Lord and do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their protection is removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. Kumbaga, do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Kumbaga, huwag kang matakot sa mga yan. Chichibugin natin yung mga yan. Kayang-kaya natin yan because God is with us. Let me encourage you. No matter how big the problem you are facing, because you are with God and God is with you, there's nothing to be afraid of. See, in verse 10, the people's reaction to Joshua and Caleb was to stone them. So when they heard Caleb and Joshua saying those, no, ang reaction nila, let's stone them to death. Now let's jump to verse 11. And the Lord said to Moses, how long will these people despise me? And how long will they not believe in me? In spite of all the signs that I have done among them. Parang sabi, Lord, no, ang dami ko nang pinakita sa inyo and still you doubt me. Now, the Israelites had forgotten God's faithfulness. Nakalimutan nila, no, that when Lot was captured by the enemies and Abraham had to rescue him, but he defeated 5 kings. Okay, that's in Genesis 14. Okay, verses 14 to 16. Nakalimutan na nila yung how faithful was God to them, no? How God rescued them from the hands of the Egyptians by sending 10 plagues. Nakalimutan na rin nila how God parted the Red Sea. So in the face of a giant, a threat, or an obstacle, or a hindrance, the Israelites had forgotten God's faithfulness. That's why I'm asking you a while ago, meron ka bang personal experience of God's faithfulness, of God's goodness? Because when we face these giants, we need to remember them, we need to go back to them. See, have you forgotten God's faithfulness in your life? So let's recap, man's unbelief and rebellion. They resented God, they grumbled and complained to God, they accused God, and they rejected God. And what was God's response? Now let's talk about God's response, God's judgment, and grace. Okay, this was God's response to their unbelief and rebellion. Numbers 14, verse 35. I, the Lord, have spoken. Surely This will I do to all the wicked congregation who are gathered together against me. In this wilderness they shall come to a full end, and there they shall die. Now, this verse summarizes all the things God will do to them because of their rebellious, unbelieving, because of this unbelieving, rebellious people. Now, 20 years old and above were not allowed to enter the promised land except for Joshua and Caleb. So parang sinasabi, no, because you don't want this promised land, then you will never have this. See, unbelief is costly. Because of their unbelief, it cost them their lives. Now, let's look how these people reacted when they heard what God said about them not entering the promised land, but that they will die in the desert. In Numbers 14, verse 39, when Moses told these words to all the people of Israel, the people mourned greatly. Diba? Nalungkot sila bigla. And verse 40, it is very interesting. And they rose early in the morning and went up to the heights of the hill country, saying, "Here we are. We will go up to the place that the Lord had promised, for we have sinned." Bigla ngayon, nang sinabing, ayaw nyo. O sige, hindi kayo makakapasok dyan, mamamatay kayo lahat sa disyerto. Bigla na lang, andito na kami, Lord. We are now ready to go to the promised land and take it. See, but the problem here now is that hindi yun yung command ni God. So they are going there without God's presence. Because that is not what God asked them to do. Verse 41, but Moses said, "Why now are you transgressing the command of the Lord when that will not succeed?" Verse 42, "Do not go up, for the Lord is not among you, lest you be struck down before your enemies." So the people once again disobeyed God out of regret and suffered a heavy loss against their enemies. Why? Because God was not with them. And sometimes out of parang konsensya, no? Sige na nga, gagawin ko na nga to. Pero hindi na yun yung gustong pagawa ni God sa iyo. See, but God remained faithful and gracious. In the midst of their rebellion, God remained faithful and gracious. Now, fast forward. Let's look at, fast forward to Joshua, no? After them wandering in the desert for 40 years. Remember, they scouted the land for 40 days. So 1 year per day, that's the number of years it took them in the desert, 40 years. So fast forward after all the faithfulness of God, providing manna, sustaining them, provision, in clothes, hindi nasira, hindi naluma. Now, Joshua 2:8, they are now in the promised land again. Instead of sending 12, Joshua sent 2 spies to check the land. Now listen to this. This is very interesting. In verse 8 of Joshua 2, sabi na, before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof, now this is Rahab, and said to them, "I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord had dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed." Verse 11, "When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below." Buti pa sila, no? Mas nakita nila kung gaano kagaling si God. Buti pa yung enemies alam kung ano yung ginawa ni God. Hindi pa papunta pa lang sila, no? The enemies are already melting in fear. Can you imagine if they only trusted God, hindi na sana sila umabot ng 40 years. Natatakot sila sa enemies nila, pero yung enemies pala nila, they are already melting in fear. The question is, what does it take for us to trust and obey God? Remember my question a while ago, what does it take for us to trust and obey God? Now let me ask this question also. What did God do for us to trust and obey Him? Ano ba yung ginawa ni God? Well, He became man. You can read that in Colossians 1 verse 15 and in 2 Corinthians 4 verse 4 and in John 14 verse 9. He became man, the image of the invisible God. The God who we cannot see revealed Himself to us through His Son, Jesus Christ. Ano ba ginawa niya? He modeled to us to trust and obey the Father completely. Ito yung time now where Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane and He said, "Not my will, but your will." What else? He proved His love for us. Romans 5:8. While we were still God's enemies, He proved His love for us by dying on the cross. Lahat ito ginawa ni God just to show to us that we can trust Him, that we can completely obey Him. If there's only one application that I want to challenge all of us, is to take that leap of faith to trust and obey God with all your heart. Maybe this COVID is your giant. I'm challenging you. Take that leap of faith to trust and obey God with all your heart. Do not let that COVID stop you from inheriting what God has promised you. See, faith takes God at His word and needs no other evidence. And right now, remember my story? I'm asking my kids to jump and I will catch them. Right now, God is extending His hand towards you and asking you to jump. My question now is, are you going to take that leap of faith and jump towards God's promises to your life? You see, leaping out in faith allows us to witness God's miracle firsthand. If you want to experience God's miracle, take that leap of faith. And surely God will catch you. I want to take this time to pray to some of you. Maybe fear has gripped you, paralyzed you from moving forward. Diba, hanggang ngayon, hindi ka makalabas ng bahay. Natatakot ka because of our current situation. Maybe some of you stopped already making disciples and saying, saka na lang, pagka tapos itong pandemic. That's why this series is all about bringing us back to that place of hope and faith. I want to challenge you. Take that leap of faith. Lord, I pray. Lord, if fear has gripped us, has paralyzed us from moving forward, I pray for your Holy Spirit to empower us to see things according to your perspective. Lord, you called us to walk by faith and not by sight. And Lord, today we are making that decision to walk by faith. And Lord, I lift up to you, Lord God, my brothers and sisters, Lord, who are being paralyzed right now because of fear. Lord, of thinking of what will happen tomorrow. Lord, because of their present situation, because of the things that's in front of them. But Lord, thank you because we know that you are bigger than any giant, than any problem, than any obstacle or hindrance that we are facing in right now. And Lord, today, Lord, we put our trust in you. And we are going to take that leap of faith, knowing that you will catch us because you are faithful to the very end. In Jesus' name, amen and amen.